Joining us now, Republican Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming. He serves on the Foreign Relations Committee. We should also note he's a doctor. Senator, we appreciate you taking the time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin on testing, because this is such a primary concern for, I'm sure, your constituents. We get a lot of viewer questions about it. Less than a week ago, the president said anyone who wants a test can get a test. In fact, we're learning from inside the briefing that today, in a country of 330 million people, total 11,000 tests have been conducted. South Korea is doing 10,000 per day. How many more tests will be out there so the American people can get a sense of how far this has spread and how quickly?
Yeah, well, according to the Center for Disease Control, 4 million more by the end of the week. But the concern rightly expressed by senators from both sides of the aisle is that part of the reagents used in the testing isn't available, so that the number may not be accurate for how many tests can actually be done. And that was the reason for so much concern and basically disappointment on behalf of the American people with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Given the concern you just outlined on that front, we heard from Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's leading this effort from the medical side alongside the vice president, said yesterday in his testimony before Congress, we must be much more serious as a country about what we might expect. On Tuesday, the day before that, this is what the president said.
We're doing a great job with it, and it will go away. Just stay calm. It will go away.
Who is right?
Well, Tony Fauci was at the briefing today, and they are both right in the sense that Tony Fauci said the largest growth in new cases right now is coming from Europe. Actually, 70% of all of the new cases in the world are in Europe, and Europe failed to do what the United States did in terms of putting in a travel ban. Dr. Fauci said they should have put a travel ban in from China when the United States did. He went further to say that from a public health standpoint, the ban that the president put in place last night from Europe was the right thing, because in 30 of the 35 states right now in the United States who have positive tests, in 30 of those states, it's a direct connection from Europe.
But the president's former Homeland Security advisor, Tom Bossert, tweeted there's little value in European travel restrictions. His point is, at this point, this might have worked a long time ago, but at this point, it is just as prevalent, the argument is, in terms of how spread it is across the United States. Is that wrong?
Well, that's not what the senators heard today from Dr. Tony Fauci, who is a master in terms of understanding virus transmission worldwide. He is our spokesman from the National Institute of Health. He was there through SARS and MERS and H1N1. And if I had to choose one of those two to listen to, I'm going to listen to Tony Fauci.
Okay. I want to ask you about numbers here. The vice president, who, as you know, the president designated to be in charge of the response, he said this morning to expect thousands of cases here in the U.S. That seems to contradict the estimates of epidemiologists as to how far this was spread. Our Sanjay Gupta a moment ago said that reasonable expectation that about 1% of the population may have been exposed already. Do the math, that's more than 3 million people. You have estimates that many tens of millions will eventually be exposed. Who's right? Thousands from the vice president, you're a doctor, or epidemiologists who predict a much wider spread? And if it is the wider spread, how can the people watching today be confident that we have the resources as a country to treat them?
Well, I don't think we're going to know for sure, and that came out in the briefing today. We don't know what those numbers are going to be. Is there going to be a spike? Is there going to be a little increase? How big is that increase going to be? Because they're also telling us, and as a doctor I completely agree, 80% of the people who would ultimately test positive may have very minimal symptoms, may get better by themselves. So I don't know how many are going to be tested positive.
Even if it's only a fifth of several million people, that's many hundreds of thousands of very sick people in this country. And some of them might be watching this broadcast right now. What do you say to them? Does this country have the ability to test them and to treat them?
Well, as you say, the number of sick people, for 80% of the people who get this virus, they might have slight symptoms for which they will recover. But for that other 15 to 20%, there are significant concerns. Those happen to be the elderly. They happen to be people with underlying medical conditions like diabetes and heart disease. And a long discussion today about how do you shield the most vulnerable from that virus, regardless of how many overall have the impact of it, because it seems that younger people are protected for some reason, very different than the flu, where young people tend to be vulnerable.
Finally, Senator, not only are you a senator, as Jim mentioned, you're a doctor. You were actually in Wyoming named Physician of the Year back in the 90s. And I just want to get your take on something that happened to me this week, right? I'm sure it's happening to tons of folks. I went to the doctor, my normal annual appointment scheduled for months. She said to me, I am so worried. Her kids were in the office because their school got canceled. She was so worried about what to do if a patient she was treating at the time came down or told them the next day that they were diagnosed with coronavirus. What do they do with the office? What do they do to the patient? She said there is no protocol from the federal government for what we're supposed to do. Think about how many physicians are facing that. What does the government owe to those doctors across America right now?
Well, physicians, they owe some level of certainty. We're seeing that in workplaces all across America. There's a case right now on Capitol Hill, and it's a matter of what one does in terms of quarantining themselves if they've been exposed. We know that there's the importance of doing that for 14 days, and we need to make sure from a congressional standpoint that there is paid sick leave for people who aren't able to be at work because either they are sick or they're quarantining themselves or they have to be home to take care of children or others who may be ill.
Senator John Barrasso, we appreciate you sharing what you know.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good luck with all of this. Thank you. More than 110